Hi, I'm Milla and welcome to another Milla's Game Room video. This one, Steam Prison, that's what's going to be talked about today, and hopefully one of the first of many Otome game videos on here, which is going to be pretty cool because in terms of VNs it is one of the fields that I'm most passionate about. So I thought I'd pick this one because it was one I finished most recently, so I can talk about it with the freshest of eyes. Even though this game is, well, going to be quite dark. So, I'll give a full trigger warning this later because for now it's just get the info, set the scene, all that kind of thing. So, this game is not by Otome because most localized games are by Otome, so I have to make that quite clear. It's by Yune, which is like another company who've been doing stuff, and not just Otome games, but Otome is a big part of their library. It was originally released for PC in like 2019 in English, and then was ported to the Switch in English. I have the physical right here. It's multi-language with English text, as well as Chinese and Japanese text as well, because, well, Japanese release, that's kind of obvious. And that came out in 2021. So this was quite a recent release in terms of the multi-language Switch library, but it's so cool to have like more physical visual novels in English, even if it's in void. And that version was what I played. It has additional content translated, such as Finn's Route, and some extra side content, which, in all honesty, I didn't read. Didn't read the side content. I read all the main routes, and I didn't want to read any more after that, even though I enjoyed myself. I'm going to get into why. So, this release was published by Yune themselves, and it looks better and plays better in terms of its like font, because PC version the font wasn't as good for me. But anyway, what is this game about? Well, it's basically, I guess I did like the setting, and I like the setting because it reminded me of the classism of Great Britain, and there's a reason why for that. So you've got the Heights, which is like the upper class, is what's considered advanced superior and kind of like a limited exclusive clique with like strict rules and customs and more like, I say, fancy or quote unquote posh clothing, if that makes sense. And then you've got the depths, which is basically like, we don't care for any of that shit. It's basically a free for all. There's like next to no rules, next to no like enforced like customs, and it's kind of more any man for themselves, which when it comes to any man for themselves in that, it also kind of does link into the dark settings. So yes, it's kind of like steampunk and cyberpunk as well. Well, not cyberpunk, but there is definitely technology, but it is like very steamy, not in terms of guys and CGs, I'm sorry, not that's a disappointment as well, but it's not steamy in that way, but literal steam. And it's kind of like as if it was set in the Industrial Revolution. It's similar to Code Realized, which is another like Otome game in that regard, which is also a game I should talk about at some point. As for the rest, it's kind of like, it's more like there's more openness towards diversity and inclusion in this Depths world. Although because of like the classism, you have the Heights, which is more like, it's kind of like the Heights is exploiting the Depths in terms of its like hoarding resources and knowledge, and then you've got the Depths, which is like comparatively more poor in some ways. I guess that's how it works. It has been a little while since I've played it, but that's roughly how it works. It's I had the concept of it reminding me of British classism quite early on, so that's kind of how it's cemented itself to me, if that makes sense. But it was also why the setting was the most interesting, because you have this really good representation of this world with these rigid structures, and it's good how it kind of like interacts with the main heroine and stuff. So the main heroine is a woman called Cyrus, who's an aspiring police officer. I know, ACAB. And she ends up basically like at the start of the game, like already like a very junior level officer, and has to pass like I think it's like a rank 2. No, to pass the rank exam to go to rank 2, and then she and her like childhood friend Finn, which is one of the heroines as well, not heroines, one of the love interests. I mean, even though Finn being a heroine would actually be really, really cool because lesbian love. But he goes down to the depths with her and then pass the test basically. And then that night basically, to give a gist, basically her parents are murdered. So then basically she gets framed for it and then she gets sent down to the depths as punishment. And it's weird because it's basically like it was framing, but it was like, who actually did it? And that's part of the overarching story that's kind of the appeal to play the game, because you want to find out who this person is that killed Cyrus's parents. And as for Cyrus himself, personality is quite... I like the personality because it was more like very like serious and one of those people that gets shit done, like tries to go and help people and has a very strong sense of justice, which I really like in heroine and stuff like that. And this person was like, it was really good, even though like it did sometimes lead into naivety, which is actually pretty good actually, to have that like strength and weakness in a character. And it has led to like confrontations, like early on in the game she ends up confronting and fighting a guy called Saxon, which is basically the head of the like hounds, which is like the department of people under this Heights area that kind of like it, kind of like act as watchmen for the people that were sent down there in this enclosed area of the depths just for people from the Heights, because classism, they've done something wrong but they still deserve respect. They're not like those people from outside. They deserve respect. So even though we've imprisoned them in this little small bit, we're going to, you know, keep them in here and let them still work for survival. Just keep away from those nasty people outside, which is kind of bad, but that's basically the overarching theme of the story, and then it kind of goes from there. And you got to deal with Cyrus as he like adjusts to this new world, which was like considerably more darker than she thought. Especially like, it's one thing to go somewhere that's rough to visit, but it's quite another to live there. And that's basically the overarching theme of that, and also wanting to go and find out what happened. And she does end up engaging with like 5 different love interests. It's quite a long game, and there's also Finn as well, but that's a separate one which I'll come on to after I've talked about these first 5. You have Eltcreed, which is basically like the young man who is the head of like the bank in his like liberal elitist district, and kind of comes across as very like, not a womanizer, but very like romantic. And then his group like hires like Cyrus as his bodyguard, if that makes sense, because he's impressed by his skills, which I thought was a pretty cool setup. And as part of his route, you also interact with Ulrik a lot, which is his friend and is more of a tundra type, if that makes sense. If a lot of people like will know what that is, and it's kind of like the I don't like you, but I actually do kind of thing. And it's weird because like the Ulrik and Eltcreed are similar in the sense of that you're both hired by the bodyguard. So even in Ulrik's route, even though you're like also hired as a bodyguard, you're still romancing Ulrik, if that makes sense. And that's kind of how those two go. There's I don't want to go into spoilers yet, but they will be doing later. And that's kind of like the key thing, is that there's like one bundle there, and then there's another bundle of 2 guys on a similar route, and then there's the 5 and 6 route, which are 2 different strands. And the 3rd and 4th ones are themed around like Adage, who's like a doctor. You kind of like, basically if you decline to become the bodyguard of Eltcreed, you end up going a different path and then seeing Adage and also Ines, which I'll get onto in a second. Adage is basically like very blunt, very like man of few words type, which is not a type I'm personally a fan of, but his character was good, and turned out he actually like he was actually pretty good at his job, like very serious in his job, and actually has his own little home on the very outskirts of like the district, which is actually quite nice in terms of like having your own little field you can go fruit and veg and then come in and treat people. It's like your own little portable clinic, and it's actually kind of cool. And then you have Ines, which is basically the second in command of the Hounds, which is interesting because he's actually not an arsehole. And in the game, a lot of the Hound staff, like Saxon and other people, including a spoiler character, are assholes. They're like pretty much evil and be like, "Oh, you little fucking," it's abusive, and it's just like, it's so weird because it really contradicts with the idea of you're still special from coming from the heights, but we're still going to treat you like shit in this depths area, which is really weird. Which especially doubly weird because that particular enclosure is called like the Sanctuary District, which is just weird, especially compared to the outside, which is just wow. I still can't overlook that, but I still thought that was interesting. Both routes were interesting in the sense of like, it's difficult to explain without going to spoilers. I'm just gonna, I think I'll start going to the spoilers now actually, because, well, plot spoilers anyway, I'd have to put a timestamp, so it can be skip it because I've not talked about the art and music yet, which I'll do after this. So basically, these two are the routes where you start really understanding the story, because if you play in order from Eltcreed and Ulrik, you tend to just get background on the world. It feels a bit like, it feels initially quite detached from the actual story, but it's kind of important to understand the backstory of the world, like how the heights and the depths came to be and all the events surrounding that, which I'm not going to spoil that because that is something that it makes sense when you play those routes, but then makes even more sense once you've played all the routes and you kind of can look back and see, oh, so that's how the story goes. So as for Adage, basically a character that Adage knows ends up being relevant to the overarching story, and you encounter this and it can get really, well, dark, which is I'll get onto the ending soon because it's kind of the worst route in terms of endings. And then you've got Ines, which is basically, you actually manage to go back up to the heights, and in that ending, if I remember correctly, you do actually find out who the killer is, which I'm not going to spoil, but that's very good for plot. And then the final route, which you've got to unlock after doing the first 4, is with Yune Sekiai, which is basically that world's equivalent of God, like a figure who's lived for hundreds of years, is revered and loved by all. Basically, it's like, in this particular route, it's like, oh, this is interesting. You've been convicted for murdering your parents. I want you to be my assistant. And that's basically how that goes, which is kind of weird. But it turns out one of the most interesting routes in terms of not just story, but also that Yune is quite a good character, because Yune is very like, kind of like, he looks and acts like a boy at times, but is also very much a deep thinker, kind of very philosophical, but also because living for hundreds of years means you have a lot of baggage, and it's interesting to see the baggage as well and how that plays out. And I'm pretty sure there's more I'm missing, but again, it's like, I'm not sure I'd rank it as a favourite route, but in terms of story, it's definitely a good route as well, because in that route as well, you also like identify the killer. And then comes route number 6 with Finn. And this is the content exclusive to the Switch version in terms of it being in the base game, but on PC it was also translated, but it has to be bought for separately. This route is basically, Finn is basically, as also like the childhood friend trope, he's also the, seems very nice and kind, but also is the yandere trope. And that's a thing. And basically in this route, he's like, oh no, Cyrus didn't do it. I know she didn't. And I'm going to say I did just to try to get her out of it, which is, it's very unique because I think one thing to explain about the story is that in this world, if one person from a pair does something wrong, they're both seen to be responsible. And in that case, that in this world, like Cyrus and Finn were basically considered a pair of officers. And because Cyrus was accused of something wrong, she was sent down. But then Finn was also sent down as a hound, basically. And what makes the other route so interesting is that these roles reverse. And that's really, really interesting. It's definitely one of the best routes in that regard in terms of the storytelling and having that perspective. And it was just really cool. And I think that's like really cool. That having that's like ultimate angle. I just like when devs are willing to like play on expectations like that when you use games. and it helps with a lot of character development. It is quite a kind of a short route though, because like the weird thing about the endings, and I've got to talk about the endings because I'm sorry, the endings is like both the best and the worst thing about this game. In terms of best, the endings in general, when you understand the story, is quite satisfying. You can like talk about the characters and just see like in the good endings they make all these wholesome connections, and you can just see them happy and often accompanied by like a lot of CG, and they are the good endings. And there are 6 of them. And as for the rest, a lot of them are bad endings. And this is kind of the part where it gets a bit triggering. So I'm just going to quickly cut and just get the trigger warning list refreshed again so I can tell you what it is. Alright, the list of trigger warnings includes, but is not limited to, abuse of all kinds, violence, murder, death with blood, prostitution as well, usage of alcohol and tobacco, verbal abuse I kind of quite familiar with the guards, and then it's just and also being in very like threatening situations with men. Oh, and sexual assault as well. That's yeah, I think that's probably not 100% complete. I will make sure a complete one's in the description when this goes up, but this is what I mean when I say this game's really dark on content, and this shows a lot in the endings. Like a lot of the endings that are considered bad, like there's usually like one good end for each character in their routes, and then there's a few other endings. Some are okay endings, some are bad, and then there's, interestingly enough, there is one character route on different routes. Like for example, with Finn's route, you get 3 in his route, and then he has 3 other endings and 3 different routes. Where it's like, oh, you're not romancing this guy, you're gonna romance me instead. And it's not the only time it happens. There's like one for Eltcreed and Ulrik's route, and vice versa. Another one in Ines's route for Adage, and vice versa, if that makes sense. And it's kind of weird saying that, to be honest, but they're not the issue. I don't have issues with endings, because they're actually like, usually it's a case of your love interest died for some reason, which is explained in the story. You can be with me instead. And it's basically like, okay, I feel sad, but I'll come with you instead. And that's just kind of weird, but you know, I don't actually mind that, because although it's sad, it's like, oh, it's still pretty good in a sense, because you've got someone else you can spend lots of time with. But then you get to the endings where it's basically someone dies, and a lot of them happen. Like there are some, like there's a few in like Eltcreed and Ulrik's routes that are quite sad, but actually quite tragic. And I like those bad endings. Like if a character's gonna die, make it tragic and don't make it too triggering. Whereas in other routes, especially Adage's route, they are not good. Like of all of Adage's endings in particular, there's 4 that are just basically someone gets killed, and it's not even the most logical of endings. It's basically like, not just for that, but for the game, like you're going to pick this option. Well, if you lower the character's affection or something like that, that's actually come across as completely arbitrary, later on in the story, instead of surviving an encounter, usually a battle, or you're trying to find something, you unexpectedly get killed. So basically, like maybe someone's shot, or you're running out and you're going to find someone, whereas in the older story, you'd find someone or survive the encounter. Instead it's, oh no, you're going to actually get shot instead, and then you'll die. Or it's, oh, this person's come up to you and is actually going to stab you. It's honestly a bit anticlimactic, and so it's basically like you witness his character going like, oh no, I'm dying, and then they die, and that's the bad ending, which is honestly bad. It makes no fucking sense. And let me tell you, trying to get 100% for these endings means literally like good ending, normal ending, and going through all these settings just to get bad endings, knowing they're just going to be very distressing and triggering and grim. It's honestly a bit of an off-putter, to be honest, especially for like bad endings in general. The ends, like, it's fine having endings that are tragic and sad and with death, but if it's just going to make no sense and just feel a bit senseless or reckless, I don't want to deal with that shit. And it is literally like distressing at times. Like the most distressing ending is one in Adage's route. Yes, Adage's route. Have you did not know that route left a very good impact on me, in case you aren't aware. This ending was basically you're trapped in a chair, and now this person, not going to explain who for spoilers, is now going to gouge your eyes out. And that's literally what happened. Like, you don't see a CG, it's basically, you think from Cyrus's perspective and she's tied up in a chair and with a blindfold on, and you don't actually see it, but it's quite clear for descriptions. Basically, I'm going to gouge his eyes out, and that's not fun. And I actually was quite distressed after finishing that route, and I just no. I'm sorry. Well, actually, I'm not sorry. I am not sorry, but I don't like that. And it's just one of those games where if you're going to play it, I would consider not doing any of the bad endings. Use a walkthrough, that kind of thing. Even get spoilers if you need to, but I would avoid the bad endings. And you don't need them to unlock the whole routes anyway, you just need the good endings. Just the best ones, whereas each character is happy, basically. And you can get that with guides. So that's the only ending you need. And everything else, the UI was good. I liked it. Font-wise, as I mentioned before, the Switch version is a lot better than on PC. And that's one reason why I played it on there instead of getting on PC. So as for the CGs themselves, they were done by a person called Ichiro Hako, as well as the character art in general and the designs, and it was really good. Like, I thought the art was great, the colours were really vibrant, and it really helped to like just a bit of a contradiction with this really dark and gritty world you had. These really bright character designs for like these heroines and these older dudes and all these other men. It was so cool, and I did like that. And the music as well, I like the music as well. I would have liked the tracks to be a bit longer though. Like, Steam Prison soundtrack is like on a about 45 minutes in total, and it's like 31 songs, so it's actually quite a short soundtrack. If that's not including opening and endings though, which could be longer. They might be longer, but I'm not sure because, well, there's kind of an issue with the fact that Yune did release the soundtrack, but as a pleb in Brexit Britain, they wouldn't ship it here, so no chance of ever having that then. But what it does mean is that I would have liked the music to have been longer. It would have been nice if it was like at least an extra 30 seconds or so that it wasn't as repetitive, because when you're going through the same game, it can get really repetitive with listening to the same soundtrack over and over and over again, even if it's good, and it can get a bit grating. But aside from that, the music's really good. And I'm feeling that I think everything as well with the routes as well, aside from the actual content, this game, they were kind of unbalanced in terms of story versus romance, because as I mentioned, a lot of them were more heavy on the story, whereas others are more just romantic, and that's fine, but it's it kind of felt a bit unbalanced. A lot of times it wasn't the most engaging because I had to sit through these romance scenes that weren't always the most interesting or relevant. Even if the characters were cool, I'm not a fan of just pure slice of life, unless there's a huge twist behind it, like it's hilarious, for example. And this game is not really hilarious. That's kind of good. I mean, I think once I was done, I was satisfied with it. I had a good time with it. I think this game is good. It's a good game. I'm not sure I'd recommend it though, in terms of if this game sounds appealing to you, I would recommend it. If you're into things dark settings, you can handle triggering stuff, you want to play an Otome game that's not by Idea Factory, that's good, because I will admit, in terms of the localized titles, some of them are a bit shit. And whereas a lot of the Automati ones, the big name ones, are in English, so you can actually play those in English. And yeah, I'm trying to think I'm probably gonna end up doing an addendum in the editor or something, because I'll probably forget, because I don't have any notes in front of me today, because new setup, new home, trying to deal with this shit, and it's fucking exhausting. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this rambly video where I just ramble and chat shit for X amount of time. You will see on the YouTube thing how long it goes for. And thank you so much for watching. If you have any suggestions on games for me to talk about, I've got quite a few visual novels, RPGs and other things I'd like to talk about, even though I will mainly stick to VNs, RPGs and queer stuff, because that's what I do here, or at least that's the goal of what I'll do here. And yeah, thank you so much. Like, comment, subscribe for algorithm, etc. and so on and so forth. And bye bye.